Rivera had always found peace in the rainforests of Olympic National Park. The Hoh Rain Forest was one of the last true temperate rainforests left in the lower 48. Massive Sitka spruce and western red cedars draped in thick curtains of moss, sword ferns that reached waist high, and the constant soothing roar of the Hoh River carving through the valley. At 32 years old, recently dumped by his girlfriend of 5 years, and burned out from his dead-end tech job in Seattle, Alex needed this solo trip more than anything. He wanted silence, real deep silence that only old-growth wilderness could offer. He arrived at the trailhead on a drizzly late October morning. The ranger at the station had warned him, "Few people out here this time of year. Weather can turn fast. Stick to the trail." Alex nodded, shouldered his heavy 55-pound backpack loaded with a week's worth of food, a sturdy tent, and extra rain gear, and stepped onto the mossy path. The first 2 days were magical in that haunting way only the horse can be. Sunlight barely pierced the canopy, creating shafts of greenish gold light that danced on the wet ground. Every surface was alive with moss and lichen. The air smelled rich, wet earth, decaying wood, and faint sweetness from hidden flowers. He hiked 12 miles the first day, camped beside a small tributary where the water rushed over smooth stones, and fell asleep to the gentle patter of rain on his tent fly. On the second night, everything changed. It was just after 2 a.m. when Alex jolted awake. His heart was already racing before he even registered why. There it was. A sound cutting through the steady rain. A baby crying. High-pitched, desperate, heartbreaking wails that rose and fell in perfect, repeating loops. The exact same cry every 25 seconds. Not an animal, not a bird. It had that raw human quality that made his skin crawl. He sat bolt upright in his sleeping bag, breath fogging in the cold air inside the tent. "No way," he whispered. There were no families this deep. The ranger said the backcountry was almost empty. He grabbed his headlamp and unzipped the tent flap just enough to peer out. The beam cut weakly through the thick mist and dripping ferns. The cry came again, louder now, seeming to echo from the dark trees across the tributary. "Hello?" Alex called out, his voice sounding tiny and swallowed by the forest. "Is someone hurt out there?" No answer, only the looped cry repeating, identical in pitch and pain. He told himself it was a mountain lion or fox mimicking prey. They did that sometimes, but this felt wrong. Too precise, too human. He tried to go back to sleep, burying his head in his sleeping bag, but the sound followed him into uneasy dreams. By 4 a.m., the cry had moved closer, now coming from just beyond the circle of his campsite. Alex lay there paralyzed, listening to the exact same wail over and over, as if the forest had recorded a dying child and was playing it back on an endless loop. At first light, he broke camp in the record time, hands shaking as he packed his wet tent. He pushed deeper down the trail, hoping distance would silence it. It didn't. All day the cry trailed him, sometimes far behind, sometimes paralleling him just off the main path in the dense underbrush. He hiked faster, legs burning, rain soaking through despite his gear. By afternoon, he noticed other wrong details. Fresh snapped branches in straight lines, as if something large was moving parallel without trying to hide. And then, half buried in the mud beside the trail, a small bright red child sneaker. Modern style, but covered in old caked dirt. No other footprints around it. That night he didn't dare stop for long. He kept moving with his headlamp on, the looped cry now joined by faint rustling sounds. like something heavy pushing through ferns without care for stealth. Around midnight, the cry suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself. Then came the footsteps. Not animal paws, human-like steps. Heavy, deliberate, slapping on wet ground about 50 to 60 feet behind him. They matched his pace exactly. When he sped up, they sped up. When he stopped to listen, they stopped too, leaving only the drip of rain from 1,000 leaves. Alex spun around, sweeping his dying headlamp beam wildly. "Who's there? Show yourself!" Nothing but dripping moss and black tree trunks. He started running, pack bouncing painfully on his back. The footsteps ran with him, never closing the gap, never falling behind. Hours blurred together. His light flickered and died. Total darkness swallowed him. He stumbled forward blindly, branches whipping his face. The footsteps still there, now accompanied by low, ragged breathing that didn't sound quite right. Too deep, too wet. Dawn brought no relief. He'd reached an old, overgrown Ranger patrol shelter marked on his map. Inside, the wooden walls were covered in frantic carvings and notes in different handwritings, spanning years. Real human. Don't answer the baby. It learns. It mimics the lost ones. If it calls your name, run. Some entries mentioned friends who never came back. One recent note simply said, "It followed me out." As Alex read, trembling, the cry started again right outside the thin wooden door. This time, in his own voice, perfectly imitated. "Hello? Is someone there?" The exact tone, the exact hesitation he had used the first night. He barricaded the door with his pack and sat with his knife out, back against the far wall. For hours the voice outside begged, pleaded, cried, switching between his mother's voice, his ex-girlfriend's, even a child's again. It knew personal details, his breakup, the fight they had before she left, the name of his childhood dog. By evening, it was screaming for help in voices of people he hadn't thought about in years. When search and rescue finally found him 4 days later, dehydrated, delirious and alone, the shelter door was open. His pack and boots were gone. Carved into the wall with his own knife in shaky deep letters were new words. "It followed me home. Don't look behind you." Alex never returned to the woods. To this day, rangers and late-season hikers in the Hoh report hearing that same looped baby cry on foggy nights, always repeating with mechanical precision. Some say if you call back, the footsteps start for you, and they never stop matching your pace until you're no longer alone. Mark and Lisa Thompson have been planning their 10th anniversary trip for months. They chose the Appalachian Trail section in Shenandoah National Park for its rolling blue ridges, thick hardwood forests, and quiet solitude. Both were experienced hikers. Mark was a former Marine, Lisa a nurse who loved trail running. They picked a less-traveled loop near the historic Corbin cabin, an old mountain homestead site, surrounded by dense woods and hidden hollows. The first 3 days were perfect. Golden autumn leaves carpeted the trail. They saw deer, heard pileated woodpeckers drumming on trees, and shared quiet evenings by the fire talking about their future. On the 4th day, they decided to explore a side ridge after spotting an unusual rocky outcrop. That's when they found the bunker. It was half buried in the hillside, overgrown with vines and ferns. A low concrete structure with a heavy rusted steel door that surprisingly opened with a groan when Mark pried it with his trekking pole. Inside was a narrow tunnel leading to a small room. Dirt floor, broken wooden cot, shelves with dusty old canned goods, and faded military-style equipment. The air smelled of damp concrete, mildew, and something sharper, like old blood or rust. On one wall, hundreds of tally marks were scratched deeply into the concrete, some fresh-looking. They laughed nervously, took photos, and joked about it being an old moonshiner hideout or civil defense bunker from the Cold War. As they left and continued their hike, Lisa kept glancing back. She swore she saw a tall, thin figure standing motionless on the opposite ridge, watching them through the trees. Mark dismissed it as a shadow or dead tree. That night at their campsite, the feeling of being watched returned tenfold. They heard soft whistling. Not a song, but single repeating note carried on the wind, like someone testing how sound traveled through the hollows. Then the circling began. Slow, deliberate footsteps walking the perimeter of their tent, pausing right outside the door flap for long seconds before retreating into the brush. Morning brought worse signs. Their properly hung bear bag was on the ground, ripped open, contents scattered, but nothing eaten. In the soft soil nearby were bare human footprints with unusually long toes and wide spreads, as if the feet were stretched or deformed. They decided to cut the trip short and head back to the trailhead. As they descended, the figure reappeared, always on parallel ridges, always the same distance away, standing perfectly still with arms hanging a little too long, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Sometimes it would mimic their exact posture when they stopped to rest. By the second night of their retreat, the whistling had evolved. Soft whispers rode the wind, sounding almost like their names spoken in a voice that was close to human, but off, slightly too slow, too echoey. Lisa woke once to find Mark missing from the tent. She called frantically and heard his voice answering calmly from the darkness at first, then turning frantic. Lisa, stay inside. It's wearing my face now. Don't look at it. She stayed huddled until dawn. When Mark returned, his clothes were torn. Fresh scratches covered his arms, and his eyes looked strangely wide and vacant. He claimed he must have sleepwalked, but couldn't remember anything. The final day was pure psychological torment. The figure grew bolder, leaving deliberate gifts along the trail. Perfectly arranged piles of stones in spiral patterns. A crude child's drawing on bark showing a family with extra long limbs, and once, a lock of dark hair that matched Lisa's exact shade and length. They reached the parking lot at twilight, exhausted and silent. As they loaded the car, Lisa looked back one last time toward the tree line. The figure stood just inside the woods, now wearing what looked exactly like Mark's missing red jacket. It raised one unnaturally long arm in a slow, deliberate wave. Weeks later, back home in Richmond, Mark began sleepwalking again. He would stand at the bedroom window at 3 a.m., whispering that same repeating whistle note. Lisa found new photos on his phone, pictures of the bunker she didn't remember taking. In the background of every single shot, something tall and thin lurked among the trees, watching. Official park records show no documented bunker at that exact location, but hikers along that section of the Appalachian Trail still report the whistling and the unshakable feeling of being studied from the ridges. Some say whatever lives in the old shelters doesn't just watch. It collects pieces of you until it can wear them. Akin, Jake Harlan was running from his life. After being laid off from his accounting firm in Denver and going through a messy divorce, he planned a brutal 6-day solo through hike deep into the vast wilderness of Bridger-Teton National Forest in Wyoming. Millions of acres of jagged peaks, dense lodgepole pine forests, hidden alpine basins, and trails so remote that weeks could pass without seeing another soul. That was exactly what he wanted. Total isolation. By day 3, he was far off any marked trail, in a high alpine basin, surrounded by sharp granite walls and thick timber. The air was thin and crisp, the sky a piercing blue. He rounded a bend near a small cascading stream and stopped dead. Lying face down on the rocks was a man in a full dark business suit, expensive tailored wool, dress shoes still polished in places. There was a single clean bullet hole in the back of the head. Blood pooled dark and fresh on the stones. No gun nearby. The only footprints were the man's own dress shoes leading from the trees, as if he had simply walked there and fallen. His expensive watch was still ticking on his wrist. Jake felt his stomach drop. He was 2 hard days from any help. No cell signal. No way to call it in immediately. He took multiple photos with his phone as evidence, built a small cairn of rocks to mark the spot, and hurried on, planning to report everything at the next trailhead or ranger station. That night, the forest felt wrong. He heard distant, sharp gunshots echoing unnaturally long through the basin, single cracks that seemed to repeat from different directions. Then silence. Then footsteps approaching his camp. Steady, confident human strides, not the cautious steps of a deer or bear. He called out into the darkness, "Who's there?" A calm, polite male voice answered from the trees. "You really shouldn't have seen that, Jake." The voice knew his name. Jake didn't sleep. At dawn he packed frantically and pushed hard, but the voice followed him all day. Sometimes ahead on what should have been empty trail, sometimes behind, always conversational and eerily polite. It talked about the weather, about stock market crashes, about how lonely the deep woods could get for someone who had been thrown away. It knew details about his firing, about the arguments with his ex-wife, things no stranger could know. By day 5, Jake was physically and mentally breaking. Food was low, water scarce in the high country. He started seeing the suited man walking parallel through the dense pines. Suit still perfectly clean, face pale and smiling pleasantly. The bullet hole still visible and slowly leaking. The man would wave and say things like, "They pushed me out of the helicopter, you know. Thought the forest would swallow me whole. It did. Mostly." On the last night, torrential rain hammered his tent. Jake huddled inside as lightning flashed. In every burst of light, the suited man was sitting just outside, legs crossed, casually, talking in that same calm tone about corporate betrayals and how the wilderness kept its best secrets. "Some of us don't leave when the job ends," he said softly. "We just get reassigned." Jake broke at first light and ran the final miles, arriving at the trailhead half delirious. He burst into the small ranger outpost, babbling about the body in the suit. A team went out immediately. They found nothing. No body, no blood, no cairn. The photos on Jake's phone showed only empty rocks and stream. The rangers looked at him with pity and concern. Jake moved to a new city far from Wyoming. He got a new job. But sometimes, late at night in his quiet apartment, he hears the click of dress shoes on the hallway carpet outside his door and a polite voice asking through the wood, "Enjoying the new position, Jake? The forest has openings if you ever want to come back." Old-timers and rangers in the remote sections of Bridger-Teton still whisper about the man in the suit who appears to hikers who wander too far alone. Some say he's a warning, Others believe he's still recruiting replacements for whatever threw him away.